Hi everyone, thank you all so much for joining us today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Ruth. I'm a Senior Content and Creative Specialist at Foundry, and we're joined today by Vincent Maurer and Tobias Eckerlin, who are going to talk about their Student Academy Award-winning short, A Sparrow Song, that they created while they were students at Filmakademie. So they're going to be talking about their creative process in the making of the film and how they were using Katana and Nuke across the LookDev, lighting, and comp stages of their production. We're going to have time for a Q&A at the end, so if anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the chat, and we'll get to that in the Q&A at the end of the session. So for now, I'll hand over to Vincent and Tobias to introduce themselves and start the talk.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're quite excited to share a little bit of insights and making of our graduation project, A Sparrow Song. And as Ruth mentioned, we also quickly want to introduce ourselves, if it works. Now it works. Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, my name is Tobias Eckerlin. I'm the writer and director of A Sparrow Song. And also a passionate lighting artist, I would say. And with me today, Vincent Maurer, our lead technical director.
Yeah, I'm Vincent, I'm a technical director, and I also focus on lighting and compositing, but also ventured into real-time rendering, building some tools, but mainly was a technical director for this production.
Yeah, before we jump into it, I quickly want to highlight the entire team who worked on the project. As you can see, there were quite a lot of artists involved. We produced the film for over a course of 3 years, and all these students and recent graduates who helped us were quite important to get the project done. A quick shout out here. And of course, I also want to explain a little bit what the film is about in case you haven't seen it yet. It's a 3D animated short film with around 10 minutes of length. Was our graduation film we did at Filmakademie. And the story is inspired by true events, and it follows an elderly widow who, in the midst of World War II, struggles to overcome her grief and rediscover joy in her life until she finds a dying sparrow she hopes to save. And she manages that the sparrow survives, and they kind of build this deep relationship and find this common language in playing the piano. And during the bombings, she takes the sparrow with her into the shelters where they sing the sparrow song together to distract the people, the children, and spark a bit of hope. And this ultimately changes the life of the widow itself. And to give you an impression of the final film, I quickly want to show the trailer as well. Yeah, as we mentioned, we worked quite some time on it. It was a pretty ambitious project, I think that's safe to say. In total, we had 76 shots and around 7 minutes of full CG runtime without the credits. We had 4 environments, 3 human hero characters, of course the sparrow in various stages, as you can see in the concept art below as well. And just a ton of background characters and assets, and all that being in a historical setting. We also tried to get this as accurate as possible. So there was a lot of work to do, and I will make some room for Vincent now, who will introduce you to our workflow and pipeline.
Yeah, as you might be able to tell, that was all quite a lot of work. How did we manage that? So we were a pretty big team, as you've seen. But that was especially for assets and animation. So we had lots of animators and pre-production people, but not a lot of people for lighting and compositing, and only one full-time PD being me. I first focused on the animation pipeline and later transitioned to lighting and comp. We were only two lighting artists, Toby and me, that like lit and comped the film. And one of them, Toby, hasn't used Nuke or Katana before this production. He was comfortable with other softwares. Why did we go with Katana then? I knew from like the past that it handles large like scale production pretty well. And its templating workflow and multi-shot workflow really catered for a film. We had a lot of assets we needed to shade, and also had a lot of shots that were very similar to each other, lived in the same environment. And we are students after all, there was a big interest in learning Katana. On the technical side for me, as I've only worked with it as an artist, and for Toby, it was mainly looking into it as a lighting artist, as it's pretty much standard in the industry. And we also knew it was possible to do it. Ratatoska, a final year project from a couple of years ago, did it before us already. That was in 2018 though, which is quite some time ago. We looked into their like workflow and tools, but they were just a little bit too old for us to reuse. So we kind of had to start from scratch. I kind of had to first come up with a like basic plan on how to implement it. Like when you start a production, especially a student film, you kind of often have to build a pipeline from the beginning. And for us, that meant we had to build a LookDev and a shot template, create a shot and asset loader, build a look development resolver, so resolving the LookDev files, integrate everything in our in-house render farm at Filmakademie, which like Filmakademie you can see here is one of our project rooms. We have to light and render our shots and composite them at the end. How did we go with that? At first, I kind of had to prove that we actually could make our film, and we also could make our film in Katana, because I was the only person on the team that has used it before. So I tried to come up with a first proof of concept scene. Back when we started production in 2023, I built a first proof of concept scene. First, trying to build like a LookDev template to have a place to shade our assets, and you can see on the right actually, it's a very early stage of our bird. It changed a bit, as you might have been able to tell. And then I went into Blender, where I'm pretty comfortable in, and built a quick demo scene based on our concept art. This got then pushed to Katana, where I assigned all the textures and shaders again, set up like an environment with lighting, some like quick tests to like render different shots, and set up all the render AOVs, and export everything out to Nuke, where we did our first look of picture tests. This is kind of where we tried to define the look of our film. So you will see in a second that it's pretty close to what we ended up with in our final shot. So keep in mind, this was our first test, and this is like kind of like how it worked out from like our first concepts until the final render at the bottom, and this is how the shot ended up in the film. And it's could be able to, as you're able to tell, it's like pretty close to our first look of picture tests. Okay, how was our pipeline set up? This is like a very broad overview of it, as we're focusing on the lighting mainly, but animation, environments, and props were all exported as Alembic caches, then combined with our CFX and FX elements that were also mainly Alembics, except of the hair, which was rendered as an XGen procedural. Our crowd was exported as USD. Why that? I'll show you later. Then we assigned our look files as KLF files, exported everything to Katana, where we set up our lighting, rendered everything out, and composited in Nuke, and pushed it to grading from there. Let's go into look development first. Our project had a lot of assets. Actually, I think we had over 250 assets, and only one LookDev artist that was also a lighting artist. I did all the LookDev for our assets. That meant I had to be really fast at it, and meant I had to build a very efficient LookDev template. We're lucky we had a couple of really good texturing artists that like mainly handled the look development. So like a lot of the LookDev was actually handled in texturing, and I only had to import the textures and adjust a couple of parameters in our one Uber shader we built for the film. You can see here our LookDev template, where we're able to import like our shader ball and different assets and turntable them around. So you could like quickly load in the asset and render out turntables, and those would look like that. We learned pretty early on that we don't really want to do too many turntables. So a lot of the assets that were not hero assets were only seen within shot context and very specific shots. And I think that's a recommendation for us, from us for a student film. We would definitely try to like review assets in their context, like if it's just like a one-off asset, and not focus on too many details, because at the end, a lot of our assets ended up in the near darkness. So I think it was quite a good workflow to just like hero out a couple of assets that got better treatment, and the rest just got rendered out in shot context, and we reviewed the assets there. I built a big Uber shader where we had all the material parameters laid out. Also built an asset loader, which we will see in a second. It's kind of the same concept we used for the whole production. Like our folder structure is very rigid, so we could just know where assets would lie and build very small scripts that would just infer like where's the asset and load it from there. So we didn't have to have a big database tracking everything in the background, which made our pipeline a lot more lightweight and faster to iterate on. Now we're switching to Katana to have a quick live demo of our LookDev process. I already opened a scene here, which is still empty, and I want to LookDev an asset. So I first load in our Look development template, and you can see it here. It consists of a couple of parts. On top here is our asset loader. Here's all the asset-specific stuff, and here's the export. At the beginning, we first have to get the latest Alendic version, latest texture version, and latest KLF. And now we should have an asset in our scene. Let's quickly expand it. Here's our helmet. Then we go in, load our LookDev setup, which is here now, which is the standardized environment where we shade all our assets. Quickly go into our camera view, and then choose an asset part to frame. Zoom in a little bit, as it's a pretty small asset. Let's do like that, and maybe like that. So, and now we have our asset in view. Then we create our main collection for the asset. It's a pretty simple one, so we just assign everything to our main collection. That kind of is our group. So if anything changes later, we just have to change the collection, and all assignments work out from there. I'll be nice and name it so I know what I did afterwards. And now we've got our asset collection here. Now we have to set up like subdivision surfaces, for example. So I can just say, okay, all assets in there should be a sub D mesh and should get subdivisions, and we'll just give them maybe like one subdivision. And then we create a material, which we'll name mHelmet to be consistent. And there we have all our parameters over our shader. So we can change the brightness, gamma, saturation of our textures, adjust specular lobes, roughness, the specular strength, subsurface scattering, emission, and so on. And all that gets loaded in from our file, from our textures. And those come up from our control node here. Then we just have to assign our material to our collection. So we go in here, pick our collection, assign our helmet material, and now we should be good to go. Let's check on the asset quickly. There should be a material on it now, and let's go down here, and we should be able, hopefully, to render it now. Might take a little bit to initialize the textures. And this is kind of, oh, okay, there's some issues with it. I guess we'll not render it. But this is like how you would set up a render, like how you would set up an asset in Look development and export the first version. And then you could change some parameters, tweak it, and export it again to go in the rest of our pipeline. Now that our assets are shaded, we have to light them. We have to first look at them. Here's here's our beautiful Sparrow. This got a bit of some extra treatment, so we added some hair shaders, for example, had to like get all the attributes over from CFX, but like the principles were pretty similar for that. And those are our main characters. They all have like hair and cloth, which all got a little bit some extra shaders, but those were the main assets that got some extra treatment. The rest was pretty much rendered from their textures. Okay, now let's get into lighting. We had 12 sequences, totaling 76 shots and about 6 distinct setups. One of them was like a like cut between different lighting setups, so it's like a bit more, but like in principle you could say we have a night scene, day scene, the shelter environment, and some outside shots in London. And those would all live in their lighting template. Let's check out the lighting templates. So in Katana, we built, for all sequences, built like kind of like a similar lighting template. It consists of a couple of sections. The asset ingest is here. Then we assign like materials and build collections. This is a lighting tree where we would set up the lighting for the shots. And this is the rendering part, where we'd render out our layers. And let's go through it bit by bit. So on top here, you see our 3D view that holds our scene. And now let's just like go through. We first load in our environments. This is done in our asset loader. I built like a small node group that is able to, like, using expressions, resolve all the assets. I built like a small Python expression for it that gets the latest Alembic version, for example, and automatically assigns shaders and everything for the assets that come from a very specific path in the folder structure. Some more complex assets like the widow would first load in their main geo and then like have prunes specific to their shots. If simulated cloth happens to be in the scene, I just check that and prune the normal cloth and add the other like high-res cloth on top. And those would basically be all the assets that get loaded in a very similar fashion. We have our environment and our animations. And as it's all expression-based, we are able to switch quickly between shots. Here we load our cameras in and some additional overrides. Here we set our interactive render filters, which allow us to like change resolution, for example, or prune hair to have a quicker IPR. And this is kind of like the core of our template. It's the control node, and it kind of is like where everything comes from. So we have our shot path there, the project root, load in our shot names and shot versions. And on the right here, you see our shot list. And that is like a live group that houses all our shots. And those come from a CSV file that lies on disk. As we didn't want to load like a full database, we just decided to write them out to a small Excel, like a small spreadsheet, and just load them in via Python, which is a lot faster. And the live group was shared between all our shots, so we could, like if we change frame ranges, those would get updated automatically. Then we get in here, set up collections, like for example for the windows, that would get like an additional material in the shot, and maybe also get like extra object settings to hide them from the render, like from the lights, for example. And then we would have additional transforms, like in this case, we moved our chair here a little bit. And here is like our main gaffer rigs. Those are the light rigs that like are made for a sequence, kind of like the key lighting, which are set like on a sequence level. We have our outside gaffer. It's kind of like the environment lights. So everything that's like out of camera, the HDI, the external lighting. Then we've got our living room setup, which is kind of everything that's inside the living room, like the lights here, and our widow. It's a standardized light rig that goes with our main character. So we all have the kind of the similar lights for all shots. And those would all have their custom AOVs rendered out for compositing later. Then here you can see the like shot variable switch. Each like line in the tree is kind of one shot for the sequence, or multiple shots if it's the same as sequence. And if we go in our camera really quick, you can see, okay, this is like our like main shot, and we can just quickly switch over to like, for example, this shot here, or the piano playing shots here. And this allows us to light all shots within one like key lighting file, which enabled us to iterate pretty quickly, especially using like the like multi-shot rendering features that Katana offers. We could quickly light a full sequence, do a first pass, and then iterate from there. At the end of our tree, you can see our render settings, where we would set up like all our rendering settings, like resolution, the renderer settings like anti-aliasing, what device we want to render on. We rendered on GPU in Arnold in our case. Set up all the data AOVs, additional AUVs, the light groups, and so on. Those would all get set up in the rendering section, and then we would branch out all the layers. So for this kind of shot, we would have a layer for the widow, a layer for the piano, and a static layer for the background. We tried to keep our render times low, so we decided to render a lot of the backgrounds that are static just once per shot, and just render what's moving in the frame. And this worked out pretty well for us. And that's kind of like our lighting template. To get more into the technical side, I built a couple of tools for lighting. You've seen them already, but I'll quickly go over them. Our control node is kind of the core part of our pipeline. It holds all the expressions, loads in the folders, and was quite flexible as everything was just inside Katana. We didn't have to load anything from any outside databases. Our LookDev resolver, written in OpScript to be a bit faster, just goes through all the assets and loads the KLF file for that asset. It's just a couple of lines of code, and I think I was a little bit scared at the beginning of writing like so much pipeline, but it ended up just being a couple of lines of code for each task I had to do, and I think I can like tell anybody like it's pretty nice to get into. I also was quite happy that Royal Render, which provides our render farm at Filmakademie, got an update, especially for production. Like we asked them if we could get the multiple rendering window to work with Royal Render, and we got it implemented pretty quickly, so we were able to send all our renders from one sequence to the farm in a very fast manner. One highlight of our production, I would say, was kind of like a cherry on top, was our crowd system. We wanted to have a very full shelter with a lot of people in them, but we didn't have a lot of like resources to build a fully like complex crowd system. And as our characters were pretty static in the background, we decided to build a kind of like a hybrid system. We would place just static characters that have just very small idle animations. Those would then get like a very quick cloth simulation for the key pose, and then the cloth would be skinned to the characters. So we kind of had a hybrid between simulation and skinning. That got exported as caches, and the instancing itself got exported as USD. I first tried building an instance in OpScript, but then realized after talking to Ruth that it's a lot quicker to just use USD for that. And we just could export them, and in Katana, which you will see here, we would load them in. And we were quite happy that we were able to basically just load in all our assets in full resolution and still have a good viewport running. So here you can see like the proxies, and here are all our loops that would get split up in Katana and kind of have a big mesh of crowd here. One sec. You'll see it here. Like this is like all our crowd assets for each of the 10 characters. And that would then replace the proxies in our scene. Our key learnings, like on my side, for automation and setting up a pipeline is automate where it makes sense, like asset loading and stuff like that's very repetitive. That makes a lot of sense to automate that. But don't try to overgeneralize. I built my like asset loading system pretty modular, so I could quickly, like for example, when we had to load our hair system, just change a couple of nodes inside the group, and we would be up and running for loading our hair. And don't automate things that are not set in stone. Like especially in a student firm, things change, and not only in a student production. Like if there's changes, try to be flexible and to implement them. And I think that worked out pretty well for us. We had some things that were like very manually driven, but largely like the things that were repetitive were pretty automated. So that's a lot of like technical info, and I think I'm gonna give you some more creative light for the lighting, and Toby's gonna come back and talk a bit more about the creative process.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. Yes, I want to talk a little bit about why we made the light we did in this film, and talk a little bit about the creative decisions behind that. When we basically started with the production, I was already thinking quite a lot about the production design, like really early on, because I think it's quite important to consider how you want to tell the story, of course. And it was quite clear for me that I wanted to tell this film pretty minimalistically and sensitive, not only because it fits the narrative, but also it fits to the main character, the widow. And I early on had this image in my head of the hands picking up the sparrow and how she holds the sparrow in her hands in the frame you can see here. And from that came the idea to really focus on the hands and tell the emotions through them instead of focusing too much on the faces. So we kind of live in this scale of the Sparrow with the hands. And based on this, there was also the idea that the characters will wear gas masks throughout the film, which of course also fits the setting, but also the emotional state of the character, which, yeah, changes at some point. And yeah, I mean, you've seen the trailer, it's quite realistically animated, and the shading is also photoreal, I would say, but we got some stylization in the shapes, and also when it comes to the details, for example, like these hyper-realistic skin pores, we didn't really had that in the character, which also comes a little bit like from paintings we studied, and also photography from the time, where you basically have, of course, like a real human subject, but due to the heavy grain, you don't really see all these details, so we didn't get lost in them, which is kind of a guideline we used there. And yeah, of course, lighting was very important to me. So we had early on also the concept of chiaroscuro, which is an art historical term, which basically means light and dark. And so you're not really afraid of getting, yeah, pure black parts in your image, and you really use the light to focus on what's important in the frame and emphasize the emotions that are important. So these were kind of our production design guidelines. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how these came along. I mean, everybody has their own handwriting and their own way of working with light and how they like to, yeah, set up the scenes. And here you can see some early works of me, some early photo work at the top, like which is super old, and also some live action things. And the last two projects I already did with Vincent together at Filmakademie. But you already get like this kind of tendency to have like really dark areas in the frame and use light really purposeful. Yeah, of course, I wasn't aware of the concept back then, but there's kind of this tendency that this kind of a way I like to work with the light. And especially for this film, of course, I mean, you need to communicate how you imagine all this. It was important to gather quite some references. You can see some reference from old paintings. But there's also temporary art and some film stills and all these kind of things to kind of give an impression of how you imagine the film to look like. And since this was a historical piece, of course, was also important to make research. And here you can see some photography from the time. And you can see, like, due to the film stock that was used, it's quite high contrast, which also gives kind of the idea where the film could go. So these were kind of the things that came into consideration when thinking about how we want to make the film. And I also want to talk a little bit about the functionality of light, which I guess is for most of you who are watching not really anything new, but I think it's sometimes important to, yeah, just recall that. Yeah, light, of course, is very important for the composition, so you can't really finish any composition without considering the lighting. Because it's like one of the most important tools to guide the viewer's eye and also what kind of emotions the audience should feel. Yeah, it should support the narrative, and I would also say, if you want to put it into one sentence, contrast is key, because that's how human reacts to, which can have different variations, you know, like contrast can be slow versus fast movement, or you have like one person versus a group, and of course light versus dark, which we use quite a lot in the film. Yeah, and especially for a Sparrow song, light was part of the story because the setting is quite dark. It's like it's very heavy and dark time, and the Sparrow represents life and hope, which we usually associate with light as well. But of course, there's no light without the darkness, so all the elements have quite a lot of symbolism in the film. So it was really important to consider the light for, yeah, the story. And this is something that also didn't just came at the end when time was to light the film. It was really something I thought about in the beginning. Here you can see a few frames from the animatic where the light is pretty much painted in already, and where you can compare to the final scenes. It's pretty much the way it was painted until the final frame. And it was also written in the script, actually, so I just want to share this small part of the script as well to give you an idea what I mean by that. Air raid warden is an honorable duty, but what is it more than just providing basic protection of the physical being? There's no life in the pale, flickering light across the subway, just despair. Her head pans across the lying bodies as she stands upon the edge of the rails. The deep black was elusive, but crowded. 2 crying children caught her eye. They crouch in the shadow of the used piano. So to give you an idea, like that we really considered lighting throughout the whole process, which I think is not only a good way of thinking for a Sparrow song, but in general. And yeah, when the time came to really get into production and people started to join the project, as I said, it's important to communicate all this. I mean, filmmaking is pretty much communicating. And yeah, here to give you just an idea, like there was a project Bible for like the story and what the theme is and all these kind of aspects, and there was a style guide where we explained like the look and feel we want to have, and also what, yeah, is the quality of chiaroscuro, and which is also important to have, of course, is like concept art, where you can see here the color script, which was also very important in the lighting process. And yeah, in the beginning, we thought that we hopefully have quite a few lighting artists joining us on this. So we gathered a lot of references for the briefings. We usually use PureRef for that and work with a lot of references. And we also, yeah, kind of set the mood for the scenes and the daytime and all these kind of things to give kind of a briefing on how the light should look in the scene. And throughout the process, we had this kind of paintings, like paint over, to give an idea how the light should be for these scenes. And sometimes it was also just like a quick grading in DaVinci Resolve to give an idea in which direction it should go. And also Sync Sketch was quite important. But at some point, yeah, production reality got us, and yeah, we realized that only Vincent and I will be lighting the film entirely. So we kind of scrapped all that and started to, yeah, just talk about it since we were sitting in the same room. And that was just the fastest way for us to work on the light, since we didn't really have that much time to iterate anyways. I think Vincent mentioned it, like the whole lighting process was done across 3 months, I think. So there was not really that much time to really think about all this kind of thing. So it was good to just talk about it at some point. Yeah, and as Vincent said, I was also the first time using Katana. So I want to give a little bit perspective as a lighting artist on that as well. Luckily, Vincent did, yeah, just the best job setting everything up, so I could really just jump into the scenes in the gaffer node and started to light the scene how I would thought about it. And it was quite important that we keep it pretty simple, so to say. So most of the scenes usually have like 3 lights maximum. And yeah, this was important to keep it, as I said, efficient and simple, since we didn't really have that much time. But the production design, of course, worked in our favor. We had a lot of same-as shots, like the shelter sequence, for example. I think we liked that also. Yeah, we probably rendered it once and did some adjustments, and then that was the final render, basically. So this was really helpful to have like also the capabilities of Katana to have it all in one template. And we also figured out that, yeah, as I said, everybody has kind of their own way of working with light. Vincent usually does a lot of lighting in Nuke because he's like just very good in Nuke. I, on the other hand, try to get the lighting as close as possible in the final render. And we used Arnold for this production, and here you can just see an example of how I usually set up the IPR with the Odin denoiser, which is quite responsive, so you get really good feedback on how the light works in the scene, so we can get really close to the final result. Still, of course, important to make some checks in compositing as well, because there's always a little bit of tweaking, which I will also show in a second, just to give you another example of how I usually worked in the template. We got like flow, where we open the scene. And I usually didn't open the scene and toggled all the geometry, of course. This is just to showcase like how much Katana can handle here. Usually I was just yeah, enabling the main character, and here you can see the scene where she opens the hand. And you can see, like, except for the background light, it's 4 lights in this scene, and I'm also rendering here, and you can see it's pretty much like it is in the final film, so it's quite close. And nevertheless, I want to show quickly how our comp template was set up. So the comp template was done by Max Wolfmeyer together with Vincent. And it starts pretty much the same. So we got like our control node at the top where you can select like which shot you're working in, automatically sets up the frame range and all those kind of things. And here you can see like all the AOVs we usually rendered. So you got your utilities, which is the usual things, so to say. It's like the cryptomats and CPaths and all those kind of things. Then you get like the characters, which are separated, so you can tweak them and separate as well. So we got the Sparrow, we got the Widow. We don't have the children in this scene, so this is why this is enabled. We have the crowd on an extra layer, which is helpful as well. And props, which we didn't have in this scene as well. This is usually the props that were animated, like the piano and the environment. So you can tweak those passes individually. And the volume. Sometimes we rendered the volume. In many cases, we just did some magic in Nuke, so to say, to make the volumes there. And here I can see like the cryptomat splitted for the individual masks we could need. And yeah, then basically you can go into the different render layers. Here you can see like the contact sheet with all the lights that were done for the Widow in this case, which, yeah, not that many. And then you can tweak those individual light AOVs if you want. In this case, as I said, I usually try to get the lighting as close as possible to what it should be. In this case, I didn't really grade that much. There are other scenes where I did quite a lot of light grading when it gets a little bit more complicated. In this case, it was pretty straightforward. But I did some grading on the clothing, for example, so it's a little bit brighter and doesn't get lost too much in the dark. And then, yeah, we applied depth of field to the individual layers because we sometimes had some issues with the feathers and hair. And yeah, in the end, it all comes together. We have like the scene, yeah, pretty much how it is in the frame. Here you can tweak a little bit more the volumes, which wasn't that necessary in this case. Apply the depth of field again. You could do some global grading, which in this case I did. Oh yeah, and that's also something Vincent will talk about this later as well. We did an HDR grading for the film, and sometimes it was important to tweak the maximum specular highlights in Nuke as well. So it is in reasonable values because sometimes I tend to do the light quite harsh, and that was sometimes something we had to tweak afterwards. Yeah, and then like the look part of the film, which is I think quite important. We did some glow. The chromatic aberration, I think that's all pretty straightforward. The vignette, halation, nothing fancy in this case, I would say. But Vincent did build like two custom things for us. That is on one hand the jitter of the frame, which gives some kind of movement and gives you an analog feeling to the film. And we also had a very specific grain Vincent built for the film because I asked him if we can make it so the grain actually distorts the lines, because like usually when you apply a grain in Resolve, it's pretty much just the text that you put on top, but real grain really kind of, yeah, goes against like these straight lines, and that was quite important to have that. But Vincent, yeah, we'll share that in a second because I hand over back to you and you can show the tools you did for our comp. What was it?
So on the tool side, we had a compositing template, as you've seen. We used subtractive light AOV grading, so we would subtract the AOV, grade it, and add it back on top. That was especially like used by me. I like to like have a bit more lights in my renders and then tweak them layer by layer in comp. I also used a couple of like real-time rendering tricks using card-based atmospherics for our light cones and some depth passes to make our volumes look nice. I also built some custom tools, which I will show you now. First, we had our shot and render layer loader that would load in the assets, kind of similar to our lighting template. This was implemented with expressions and TCL. Now I would say we would rather use the new graph scope variables for that, but those weren't available when we did production. I also built a couple of like nice lighting tools. Our eye-ping setup is one of them, where we would render out some extra passes from Katana that we built there to like have our like eye data, and from there on we could build like specular highlights, kind of like subsurface scattering and refractions in the eyes in comp, because it was quite hard to light the eyes because they are hidden beneath masks. I also built the stylized grain setup here, which is like a particle system that scatters small textures on the image and resamples the frame with them to get a very realistic film-like looking grain. And this all like helped build really the texture and the look of picture for the project. One extra thing I did is my research project, which was called Capturing Light with Robots, where I used a motion control robot to capture lens flare images. I basically like raster the image for the flares and then do machine learning and some image processing on them to build very realistic looking lens flares. That could be one like single point flares, but also like applied as a full glow on the image. And that helped to like make our image a bit softer and give it a bit of flare. You can see it here. This would be like a little very exaggerated, so you can see it. But you go in, it like takes in the highlights and builds lens flares from them that are very like, for our case, we didn't have a lot of like very pronounced flares, but more like a flare texture and glows around them. But this is like how it was set up. And if you want to read more about it, you can find it here. To finish a lot off, we graded our film. We are quite happy to be the first HDR graded animated short film at Filmakademie, which meant we went through the extra hoops to set up an HDR pipeline together with our really nice staff at the like color grading suites. Like HDR really helps to enhance contrast, color, and realism of an image, and gives you a bit more control over shadows and highlights. And that is especially important for a film like ours, where it's quite dark, but there's also can be like pretty high peaks. We decided pretty late in the production to go with an HDR pass, which was something I would probably do different in a new film. Like we had to do a lot of extra research, like setting up Dolby Vision, which allowed us to control the different deliverables very well. But also you need to do like a lot of extra QC to make sure the highlights don't blow too high, but also that the shadows are not too grainy, for example. But at the end, I'm quite happy with the SDR and the HDR and the cinema version of our film. I think it looks quite gorgeous. To conclude everything, we are really happy with our approach we took. I think we were able to really choose the right tools for the jobs. I think Katana and Nuke really gave us the efficiency we needed to make our film possible. Like being able to light so many shots in such a short time was really helpful for us. And we would really like to thank the Foundry and the people at the unofficial Katana Discord that helped us out a lot during, like, from the beginning of the production, like setting everything up to like fixing like small rendering issues right at the end. That was like really special for us. And I can like strongly recommend like student films to have a look at Katana and see if it might be a good fit for their pipeline. So yeah, that's it from our side. Quick shout out to all our leads, especially again, thank you to Toby. Come here. To Toby for like bringing this film to life and trusting us with it. And yeah, that's it from our side. We're happy to listen to questions now and answer them.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really incredible to see all the work that went into it and to see the result. It's such a beautiful project. So yeah, huge congrats on such a successful and incredible film.
Thank you.
Some questions to start off. I think there's a few questions in the chat, but I had some that I just wanted to ask to kick things off. You mentioned that you LookDev most of the assets, or the background assets at least, in context of the environment rather than separate, because the details would be lost in the darker lighting setups, which is a great tip for other groups that are doing projects. Did you have any other advice for students that are looking to tackle quite an ambitious student project like this?
Maybe Toby start.
I mean, I think, as I said in the beginning, also it was quite ambitious, but it was very important to have like the team also to get all this done. So I think it's quite important to, yeah, really highlight that and have, yeah, look out for your team and communicate and collaborate. I think that's like the most important parts, and especially in a student project, that you give the people also the opportunity to learn something on the project and not just work for free, so to say. I think that's something quite important, which was also very, yeah, good for us as well.
And I feel it really paid off for us. I think there's like two types of advice I would like to give. Like one, like being like really early in the production, it's something we would like plan out your film and try to like set a base layer of like try to set a target of the film that you definitely want to have at the end, because there's nothing like worse than not having a finished film. So in our case, we tried to set up like a base film that we definitely wanted to make, and then we had like ideas. Like Toby is a director and he wants to have a lot of nice things, and I like to have nice things too. But I'm like, can we make it? I don't know. So like for example, like the crowd setup, that was something we wanted to have, but we were not sure like how good it would be, and that was kind of like we had like kind of like milestones in between where we'd see where we are in the project, and if we had time for it, let's add like this cherry on top. And I think like we were able to get all the cherries on top we wanted to have in our film, but we would definitely have had a film if we wouldn't have been able to make those. And I think that's like something I would really like recommend to do.
Great. Is there a sort of particular challenge that stands out to you as one of the biggest challenges throughout the project? Something that you had to really sort of sit down and think how you were going to solve it?
I mean, from the director's point of view, I think the most challenging part was to convince everybody that we can actually do this film. That probably took some time. But of course, I mean, like from the technical side, I think there were quite some challenges as well.
Yeah, I think that the main technical challenge was what making that possible, what we tried to make possible. But like I think like the big things, I mean, you've seen it in the trailer, like the big things in our film was like making the like groom of the bird. There was like shout out to our groom artist Rebecca, who did an amazing job grooming not like only one bird, but like three like multiple stages of it, and then getting everything together and making it look cohesive and tackling the amount of shots. I think like we knew there was a lot of work to be done, but I wouldn't say I knew like how specific this work would be. Like one, like making everything look good, but also making individual things look good. Like finding that balance, that was like really tough. But I think we managed it.
You definitely did. Yeah, it's a really beautiful film. So question from Mark: what environment or scene was the most difficult or challenging to light?
To light. I think the outside shots of London were actually quite challenging. I mean, that was not featured in the presentation now, but there's like a scene where she lets the sparrow fly, which we wanted to have like in a very specific situation because you couldn't see the face. That was quite complicated to light it because the camera is like from top down basically, and you directly see into the face. So we needed some cheats there basically to make that work. I think that's I would spontaneously say was the most complicated to light.
Yeah, I think for me it was like a lot of shots were like pretty clear where they should go because there was like briefs for them. I had like one specific shot, I can't remember which one it was. It was like an over shoulder shot over the back of her. They were just like always missing like the little bit. I think that like took the most iterations on my side, and there was like small things to fix on that. But yeah.
We have another question. It's great to see you both speak about the workflows and all the difficulties and the search for the solutions to them. How did you get into this initially and develop your passion?
Into making films. Is that the question? Do I understand it right?
Yeah,
I guess
looking
that,
into animation and created on the area in general of filmmaking.
okay, I try to keep it short. I always have a problem with keeping myself short, but quite a long story. But yeah, basically, I started out with photography, and when I started my first studies, which were design focused, kind of started to make films. So back then, I wanted to do more like a camera and live action film. And I kind of realized at some point that I couldn't really make what I was imagine, and that's when I started to learn VFX and then stumbled basically into animation where I kind of lost my heart at. And short version, that's why I do that now. Oh,
Yeah.
it never was so short.
On my side, I had a bit of a path. When I was like really young, I started with like Lego stop motion, and then realized, okay, I can do that on the computer too, and build bigger Lego sets. So that's like kind of how I started. And then was like, maybe I want to be a cinematographer, and then realized that working on set is like really hard. And I like to move around lights very quickly because it's faster. So I kind of went back into like 3D and like did kind of a mix of real-time rendering and also like animation, and really like in the last couple of years during studying realized that like animation is kind of where my heart lies really. So yeah.
Cool. And was there a specific reason you used Arnold and not another renderer, like V-Ray or RenderMan?
There was actually one scene where we used V-Ray, which was like the London establisher shot, because that was kind of working out of pipeline. I think the decision to go with Arnold was kind of personal preference because I really liked the look of Arnold, and also Arnold GPU was kind of a good decision for us to keep like the footprint low on the production.
Yeah, like I have worked in Anand before, and it was kind of like the choice I like was comfortable with already. And we tried to really keep the things we already know, especially like venturing out in something like unknown, like building a new pipeline in Katana, having like a core like a renderer, for example, that like we know and like know how to work with was quite nice. And I was a bit cautious about rendering times, especially on CPU, but we tested out the GPU renderer and it like worked out really well for us for like 90% of the shots. So that kind of made our decision a lot easier to say, okay, we're able to like render our film pretty quickly too. So yeah, that's how we ended up with Arnold.
Awesome. There's a few more questions, so I'm just trying to read them. So you emphasized, I think Tobias, this was you, you said that in student films, things can change. So what were the most notable changes from the initial concept or storyboarding that came up as you moved along the process?
I think there was actually the beginning shelter sequence, like the first time when we were in the shelter. There was quite some changes in the edit, quite late, I would say. That's probably one like the where the most changes happened, apart from the animatic. I think that's pretty much it. There were some scenes that were actually like from the first version until the final film just stayed the same. But yeah, there was uh, quite some process on establishing the situation at the beginning. So there was quite a lot of iteration on that one.
Yeah, I think like having a really rigid and like a locked animatic really helped us to stay true to what we wanted and
Yeah,
not venture out too much.
yeah.
Cool. There's a question around AI and the growing possibilities of AI. Did you use any tools or AI or machine learning tools in the project, or have you investigated any that you might look into for future projects?
So like when you're talking about generative AI, no, we didn't use that. But we had like a machine learning denoiser, right?
Yeah,
When I
we
remember
used
that.
op image denoise for denoising, and we like in a couple of shots used the custom model like I like built up from scratch for lens flares, but that's about it. Like the rest was like all like really tried and true 3D animation texturing. Yeah, but I mean, there's definitely room for it in the future, and I think especially like in like in tasks like denoising, like upscaling and stuff like that. That's like I think where it really shines.
Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, I'll wait a couple more seconds just in case any more questions come up in the chat. But thank you again both for your presentation. It was really insightful and very inspiring, I'm sure, for everyone watching. If anyone is interested in using Katana or wants to give it a go, we are currently offering a 90-day free trial alongside the RenderMan challenge. So that's so that anyone can use it for the challenge. If you haven't heard of the RenderMan challenge, it's a great opportunity to sort of work on a project over a 3-month period. And there's some really cool prizes as well. And also to just mention again, I know that you already shouted out the Katana Discord, the community-led Discord, but yeah, it's a great resource. So definitely recommend people joining that and asking any questions that they may have on there. But yeah, there's one final question that's come up. If you are happy to share what's up next for both of you.
Oh, yeah, thanks again for having us. So like what's like really gonna happen soon is we're gonna go to New York in 2 weeks for the Academy Award ceremony, like Student Academy Awards, which is quite nice. On my side, I'm currently working in games, lighting a video game until the end of the year, and then moving to Vancouver. I'm gonna work in animation and feature films.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, of course, start the next project. I think it's kind of a good momentum right now, and there are a few themes and yeah, stories I want to tackle. That's definitely something I'm going to continue.
Yeah, thank you
Amazing.
again, like everybody, like for coming and like for like hosting us here. It was quite nice to share our work. Yeah.
Yeah, and if there are any questions, of course, feel free to write in the Discord channel. We are also on that, or yeah, hit us up on LinkedIn, or like there are so many ways. So yeah, but yeah, thanks for coming, and of course to Foundry for having us.
Thank you.